All right.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the City of Pittsburgh's Climate Resilience Forum. I'm Dr. Jamil Bey, Director of City Planning for the City of Pittsburgh, and I want to begin by acknowledging the urgency and purpose of today's conversation. Late last month, Pittsburgh and Allegheny County were struck by a powerful line of thunderstorms that caused widespread and unprecedented damage. At the height of the storm, more than half of our region's electricity customers were without power. Trees fell by the thousands, many bringing down power lines and blocking access in neighborhoods across the city. While this storm was extraordinary, the scale of its impact was not just about the weather. It reflected deeper, long-standing challenges: aging infrastructure, deferred maintenance, and underinvestment in systems we now recognize as vital to our resilience. That includes our urban tree canopy, which isn't just decorative, it's infrastructure, and it needs the same level of care, maintenance, and planning as roads, pipes, bridges, and power lines. But this isn't a conversation just about trees. Climate resilience demands that we take a comprehensive look at how our systems, public health, housing, energy, water, food access, transportation and mobility, communications and emergency response, we must evolve to meet the reality of more frequent and more intense weather events. And that's why we're here today. This forum is more than a moment to reflect on what went wrong. It is a major step in a citywide process to develop Pittsburgh's first all hazards mitigation plan, a long-term community-informed strategy to reduce risk, improve response, and build a more just and prepared city. What we hear today, what we learn from our experts and from you, will seed the development of that plan. Today's session is designed to help us all learn. From climate scientists who understand what the data is telling us, from panelists representing forestry, utilities, emergency management, sustainability, and public works, each sharing what this storm revealed about their response systems and what must come next. And from you in the audience, advocates, community organizers, and partners who've long been pushing for a more resilient and equitable city. So if you're joining virtually, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen to share your questions, comments, and observations. Even if we're not able to address every question during the broadcast, we will document and review every comment, and they will directly inform the planning work ahead. Because resilience is not built in isolation, it's built in community. So I encourage you to listen critically, think forward, and contribute boldly. Together, we're laying the groundwork for a safer, more equitable, and climate-ready Pittsburgh. So let's get started. Mr. Mayor, I want to first thank you for bringing this together and having this conversation, making space for this conversation.
Yes, first, let me just say thank all the panelists that's here. This is a plan that should have been made, but now we're in the process of making it. I think a couple of weeks ago when we seen that storm and how it really, and how the devastation that it did to our city, I think it was a wake-up call for everybody. We have to be more proactive than reactive when we're ready to face such severe weather. And we know that more severe weather will continue to come. And so to start this plan and make sure that we have a plan that addresses climate change is something that we have to do. People got to understand that this is real, and if we're going to be prepared to deal with climate change, and we have to change the climate by making sure that we're resilient and making sure that the community is educated. One of the things that I always say, particularly in underserved neighborhoods, is that when things like that happen, we don't know where to go. We don't know what to do. All we know is that we're out there and we don't have no electricity. We don't have no lights. Our babies is there. Grandma can't get her oxygen tank filled up. We need a plan that addresses everything. And this is why this is so important. We can never be in a situation where we're not prepared for national disasters. We know that they will continue, that the storms will be more stronger, and that with your participation, this is why we need you. The more we participate as a city, the better we will be to be able to take care of our neighbors. It is extremely important that when we come together to talk about what solutions are, that we share. We share our fears, we share what our hopes, and we share that we believe we need to do in order to protect one another. So as we go forward, I look forward to listening to, being able to read the report when it's done and enact it in a way This speaks volumes of how we care for our communities.
Thank you for that. Now, before we go to our panelists, I'd like to first introduce our friend from Penn State's Department of Meteorology and Atmospheric Science, who's joining us online, Ben Reppert. Ben, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're no stranger to tracking and communicating about evolving threats related to climate change and weather events. So I'm going to turn it over to you to let you, just set some context for us, if you would.
Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully that is showing up.
Yep, we're good.
Excellent. So first and foremost, I just want to reiterate a sincere thank you for the invitation to be here today. This is a really important discussion to be having, and I consider it a privilege to be joining you today in having it. So I am a lecturer of meteorology and emergency management at Penn State, and this, what once seemed like a unique intersection of fields, has been becoming a much busier intersection in recent years, largely surrounding weather hazards that are turning into disasters. So we're going to frame our conversation today by talking a little bit about future risks associated with a changing climate. So first and foremost, when any discussion of climate change comes up, I think a lot of folks' brains go immediately to global temperature trends. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but in terms of what's going on globally, the poster child, so to speak, of climate change is the global warming. Average global temperatures are going up. But on individual community by community levels, this is not exactly the best way to think about climate change. Global temperatures are on average rising. It's very important to recognize and not lose sight of. But I think it's created some issues about how the rest of us, or how a lot of the rest of us, think about climate change. It immediately will cause us to basically picture, the fact that the Earth is warming, that it means warming everywhere all the time. And that's not the most helpful way to start a discussion about hazard planning for a city. Oftentimes these days too, it can be really difficult to think that there's hope or things that we can do. We tend to see a lot of people almost get turned off of wanting to do anything about it because sometimes it seems like it's overwhelming or it's a problem too big for us to solve. And that's not true either. And for many years, the face of climate change or global warming was, for example, like a sad polar bear in the Arctic. And there's no doubt that climate change is affecting them too, but we as residents of cities, we don't really relate well to polar bears. And so there's a better way to go about thinking about these things. And it's, is climate change going to increase the flooding in my community? How will it make things hotter? When? How bad could it be? Are there going to be more frequent windstorms that take our tall trees and lay them over on power lines and houses and cars? Will there be cold outbreaks that catch our vulnerable populations off guard? Or something knocks out power and then it gets cold and then people are freezing without electricity? As it's already been alluded to, the data tell us that at regional levels, climate change is basically going to lead to more of these extreme events. We might not see all of these types of events in a given year. We might go several years between them. Some years we might see multiple such events. And I've got a picture of dice there in the center of the screen because I like to think about this as if you roll 2 dice, your range of outcomes is anywhere between rolling a 2 and a 12. Climate change is not eliminating rolling a 2 or a 3, for example. It's not eliminating possibilities, but it is tilting the scale or increasing the odds of rolling certain outcomes. And when we think about extreme weather, I think it's helpful to basically make that analogy that climate change is increasing the odds of certain extreme weather events happening, whether they're more severe or more frequent or both. The other problem that we tend to see these days is there is a strong disconnect between the risks that people are afraid of or most worried about and the risks that really we all should be. And so when we track weather hazards that either lead to more mortality or morbidity, whether it's fatal hazards or just hazards that hurt people, they get looped into these or lumped into these 8 different categories. I have these listed top to bottom in the order that, on average, the average US citizen thinks that these hazards are most dangerous from top to bottom. So basically, if you went up to somebody in the United States and you asked them to rank all the hazards in order of most danger, this is what that list would look like. The problem is, if you look at the actual data and rank these hazards in terms of how many people die because of them each year, the list is completely different. So you'll notice that a lot of the things on the left side that people tend to be most concerned about are actually some of the ones that are, on average, least concerning. And so the first part of coming up with an all hazards plan to mitigate from these future events, we need to know essentially what we need to be planning for. And so when we're talking about determining risk, there's the weather hazard component. And we already talked about going forward, climate change is expected to make the extreme events worse. But there's 2 other things that are important, and Mayor Gainey already touched on both of these. We have social vulnerabilities in our society, whether that's related to income, education, health, a multitude of things, and sometimes there can be several of these that compound one another. But vulnerabilities in our communities, that's a second piece. And then resilience is the third piece. And so when you are trying to figure out your risk for things, you have to think about all of these. What are the hazards, and are they getting worse? What are our vulnerabilities, and how resilient of a community are we? Weather hazards, we can't do too much about. We're still going to have weather. We can't, at least yet, really prevent the actual weather event from happening. Some social vulnerabilities we can do some things about. Some, there are such deep-rooted problems that go beyond the scope of Pittsburgh or Allegheny County that to this day we can't quite solve all of those issues. But community resilience is completely in our control. And so a lot of work done in recent years when you combine climate scientists and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, among a lot of other partners, including city infrastructure and lots of city planners, we've been able to come up with this national risk index and right now determine the 3 greatest risks that Pittsburgh and Allegheny County face going forward. Now, it's important to note that while I have the top 3 here listed on the screen, we also can't lose sight of all the others. But I mean, this isn't meant to be like a made to order top of the list, but it does turn out that even in lieu of the storms just a few weeks ago, damaging winds related to thunderstorms and severe weather is the top hazard. And Allegheny County and Pittsburgh, it's in the top 10%. If you look at all the counties nationwide, Pittsburgh and Allegheny County is in the top 10% in terms of risk for thunderstorm-related wind damage. It's also in the top 10% for flooding, and it's in the top 13 to 15% for hazards related to cold and winter weather. And a lot of this is driven by the expected annual loss from these events. Damaging winds is by far the top because in any given year, when you combine all these things, the expected weather trends along with vulnerabilities and resilience, in an average year, the county is expected to take on about $9 million in loss from damaging winds, from an average of about 2 events per year. In flooding, in an average year, the county would be expected to take on about $2.5 million in damage from about 7 to 8 events. And in terms of cold and winter weather, it's about $1 million in expected annual loss from about a couple of events per year on average. So those are the current top three things that the city and the county would be facing. Again, important not to lose sight of all the others. So I'm going to finish up with this, and I hope this underscores the importance of today's discussion and also emphasize that this is a really good time to be having it. So when it comes to reducing our risk to these things in the future, a lot of it usually requires some investment, both time and money. The time part of the investment usually comes from a motivation to act. Motivation to act, that usually comes after one of these damaging events, and we just had one. And so right now, the fact that this meeting is happening, the fact that so many people were affected a few weeks ago, there's motivation to think about this and do something about it. The problem is, and this is again a problem beyond Pittsburgh, this is a nationwide thing, the time that the financial means to act are there, they don't tend to line up with when we are motivated to act. And so ultimately, we really need to capitalize on the times when the motivation is there and there is any kind of financial means to do something about it. And so for right now, I will leave it at that and just once again underscore that I'm very glad that this discussion is taking place today. It's really important, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thank you for that, Ben. We're going to ask you to stick around and you can help us, with the Q&A, and as we get further into the conversation, help summarize some of what we're about to learn. So now we're going to turn to the panel, and we're just going to go down the line and, start with you, Chief Jones. You're no stranger to this work. You built a career, you've served us well in this capacity. And so the opening question, and whatever part of this you want to take, just down the line, what did last month's storm reveal about how your systems were most critical vulnerabilities in your system? And what are the most immediate opportunities for resilience investments?
So the critical vulnerabilities in our particular system is that we can plan, but no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's impossible to plan for every possible scenario. In this particular case with the storm, the plan that we have in place for severe weather was implemented and it worked. What people don't understand is that when with an emergency incident, we start out behind the 8 ball and we have to catch up and get ahead. This takes time. And I know people's patience is short, especially when they're sitting there in the dark. And so it takes a little bit of time for that to catch up. As far as resiliency goes, I agree with Professor Reppert about resiliency. Resiliency basically is an entity's capability or capacity to take a hit like a storm or some other event, rapidly recover from that, and move forward to what we call the new normal. Why is it called the new normal? Because you can't change the fact that you've taken a hit. The city took a hit. We can't change the fact of damage. And the best we can do is quickly recover and move forward. So with that being stated, in order to have a resilient community and a resilient city, we need resilient individuals. You cannot have a resilient city without resilient individuals. Trying to build a resilient city without first trying to build the resiliency of our citizens would be like trying to put a roof on a house with no walls and no foundation. So that would be the first step in my mind, is to help the individuals in the city, the citizens, to become more resilient to all risk, not only those of the national or natural disaster set. So with that, we're trying our best to make sure that we have community, individual set first, and then once the individual is resilient and knows how to respond in this type of event, can help their neighbors also respond and help with this type of event. And that's what we're going to work on. Here's the challenge. As the mayor stated earlier, you have a lot of people in underserved communities. It is documented and research has shown that disaster and tragedy when it comes to these type of events follow poverty. So there's a multitude, as the professor said, of various social, economic, political, and governmental reasons why that is. That's beyond the scope of this discussion today. And frankly, really is important. It's the hand that we've been dealt, and that's what we have to work with.
Thank you. That's Chief Darrell Jones, Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. I did not introduce you before asking you. All right, so next we'll go to Director Chris Hornstein of the Department of Public Works, the City of Pittsburgh.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Bay. So this storm, I think, revealed for the Department of Public Works, several critical vulnerabilities that we're working to address. I think just going back to the storm itself, having my experience with it with our staff from the moment it happened, and you're gonna hear a little bit more detail there, but it's upfront standard work that we, how we respond when we're overwhelmed and standardizing tools to do that. This includes gathering critical information that we can share with our partners, not just in public safety, but also in utilities, and how we can get them that information that we can make it actionable for them. I think it's important for folks to realize that we are eyes and ears on the street, just like the public. We're out on the streets every single day. And so better standardizing that information to our partners, can all help us respond to these events as quickly and reasonably as possible. I think the good news is, standard work review, it's not part of our skill set. This is something that I brought when I became director, and we've worked hard internally to build this system of work. So this isn't an investment of resource; it's an investment of time, of staff time to learn. So that's a positive from my perspective. As beyond internally, we lost several critical pieces of infrastructure that we used to respond went down during the storm event that we need to shore up. These are public safety facilities that were without generator power or had backup generators that did not respond or failed during the course of the event. These can have critical operational impacts to public works and public safety, but also critical impacts to shared resources like our field supply and how we address the public. So we'll be looking at those things. We're compiling that information, getting that together. That's also, we need folks to understand that Public Works is actually, in fact, the first responder. We're right there with firefighters. We're right there with police officers and EMS. We were out there at the beginning of the storm, and we're still out there cleaning it up. So this means that we need to, carefully consider investments in our resources to help us be first responders. And this includes not just people, but vehicles and equipment that we need to do the job. And I think lastly, I asked the public and our staff and internally ourselves together collectively as a community, I think we need to revisit long-held beliefs or sometimes ideas that come up during these events that are worthy of talking about, but some of which might just be impractical, and also help, clear up misinformation in the public eyes. A lot of these are centered around what does it mean to have an urban cavity? How does it benefit us? How do we manage it and the resources that we need to manage it? But it also gets down into, critical parts of community support infrastructure, how folks access community support, how folks can be connected with their neighbors, how we all can have a plan to be resilient together. And other questions that are just basic, like can trees and overhead power lines coexist? I believe that the answer is yes. But with an if, and that if is, we have to be careful about what that relationship looks like. And, I think some other long-held beliefs about folks with weaker, perhaps community support systems. And, I think we need to be careful there. Because some proposed solutions that we've received, I actually think may create more harm than good, which is something that we don't want to have happen.
Thank you, Director. Down the line, next we're going to go to you, Michael. Michael Kelly is the Utility Coordination Arborist in the Forestry Division in Department of Public Works, the City of Pittsburgh. And Mike, you and I probably, at least on this panel, work longer together than anybody.
I think so, yeah.
Tom, did we lose our feed?
No.
Okay. Working and thinking about trees and the urban canopy, like I said, you want to talk a little bit about from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Dr. Bay.
What your work looked like?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on the panel. Pittsburgh is an extremely green city, as everyone who lives here knows. We have over 3 million trees, and these trees, they serve as the lungs and kidneys of our city. They are one of our greatest resources, but they, of course, do come with associated costs and risk. The last storm we had winds in excess of 85 miles an hour, which is effectively a Category 1 hurricane. And to put that in perspective, for even a healthy tree that doesn't have any structural defects, that is going to have decades of future service, cleaning the air and providing oxygen, that is the equivalent of getting hit by a car when you're crossing the street. There are a certain level of unexpected or unstoppable forces that lead to catastrophic damage, and we saw some catastrophic damage as a result of this storm. Now, that being said, there are a number of practices we can engage in and a number of facets of our work that are actively engaged in mitigating these risks and reducing future risks to our community and to our natural resources. Because every single one of these trees we lose makes it harder in the future for us to live in our communities as we see temperatures increasing, as we see decreasing air quality. We're going to see increased localized flooding for every single tree that is lost. And that means it's absolutely essential that we build back. Now, fortunately, many of the best practices for reducing the risk associated with your urban canopy start at day one with tree planting. We operate on a principle of right tree, right place, all across the city. Now, this is developed since the early days of urban forestry, when we planted any tree anywhere where it would fit. Our current practices involve planting utility-compatible trees, that is, those that do not grow into an area where they will impact the power lines. It includes a regime of pruning of juvenile trees so that when they grow into mature trees, they do not have significant structural defects that increase their rates of failure. And more importantly, in the winter seasons, when power loss can be even more catastrophic because it may mean loss of heating in homes, it makes them more resilient to ice. Now, the other aspect of this is maintaining an agile and rapid response team. And fundamentally, we are able to mobilize the same day as storms, and we're often out as the storm is progressing, doing triage, assessing locations, and making sure that all of our assets are allocated as efficiently as possible. But we do have some weak points, of course. Our forestry staff is not able to field sufficiently large numbers of staff for a long duration event. And this is something that we've been collaborating with the supervisors and the rest of the Department of Public Works on to improve over the past several years, including new staff that we have received, some of which started during the storm and some of which have continued to come on board this week, as well as direct coordination among the divisions with our forestry teams, with the utilities, with all of the active partners who are in the field. And this comes into our final point, which is we have lost a significant number of trees, and therefore we'll be losing a significant number of ecosystem services, which at the end of the day are going to have massive negative impacts across the city that will be felt disproportionately in our underserved neighborhoods. And one of the things we need to look towards in order to improve our ability to withstand future events like this is making sure that our canopy is being rebuilt as these events occur, and that it is being rebuilt in a manner that is sustainable and more easily defended against extreme weather events through the application of preventative maintenance and the principles of right tree, right place.
Thank you for that, Michael. Next, I want to hear from Casey Stewart, who's the Director of Safety and Security at our water utility, Pittsburgh Water. Thank you, Casey.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to join the panel today. On behalf of Pittsburgh Water, obviously our mission is to deliver safe and reliable drinking water to all of our customers in our community and to help to support the community resiliency. Resiliency is essential to us in that we want to make sure that we are providing consistent, dependable services to our customers. And obviously the event of April 29th with the storm proved to be quite a challenge for our utility. Our team worked relentlessly to ensure that we were able to withstand the power outages that affected so many. And while I applaud our team's effort in working diligently to keep power running, I must say that on a positive note, there was great coordination between the city of Pittsburgh and Duquesne Light Company to ensure that we did have that priority to restore power to some of our most critical pump stations. So for that, we're very grateful. That collaboration and team effort is definitely essential to maintaining our community resiliency. But in terms of what this really did expose for us is that mainly aging infrastructure is something that is really detrimental to us and a challenge that we face. And I think that many other utilities also face similar situations like this, in that we have pump stations and facilities that are anywhere from 50 to 100 years old now. And many of those were not equipped to withstand the type of weather that we're seeing in the climate change that we're seeing. So while we put a significant amount of effort into developing redundancies and creating resiliencies within our system, it also did expose that there's still a lot of work to be done to ensure that the community is served. I think one major aspect of it was realizing our interdependencies with power and communication. While we have backup power at many of our facilities and critical pump stations, that isn't foolproof. You need fuel, you need resources to continue to run those things. And you need that prioritization to restore power when it's needed, which in the case of last week, we were granted, which was really a great response from our local utilities to do so. You need emergency contracts. So one other challenge we had is just staffing. So we have electricians out doing work to maintain these systems, and they need to rest, as we all know, and they need, and a lot of that knowledge that's there is starting to age. And having emergency contracts with different specialized companies that can provide us critical services that we need in these types of events is really necessary. Often, and also looking at our systems too, and realizing where there's opportunities to be able to do things internally as opposed to relying on DLC or an electrical provider in those situations. Often when you need that one small switch turned and you need somebody from Duquesne Light or a specialized provider to do that, that's when they're in the thick of everything. So we experienced that. Very grateful for the prioritization that we did receive, but we really need to look at how do we close those gaps and make our system more resilient as well.
All right, thank you for that. Before we go to our last panelist, just want to so we're hearing about collaboration, communications, aging infrastructure, vulnerable populations. Now, our final panelist, Flor Marion, the Assistant Director of Sustainability and Resilience in my office, the Department of City Planning. You're not an emergency responder. You're not out here doing that work. You have a different perch here. And so as a planner, and sustainability and resilience, you're thinking about the future of this and how we mitigate and prevent. What's your take on this conversation that we're having now, and how do we think about framing the next steps?
Thank you, Dr. Bay. I want to thank the mayor and you for organizing this event here. As you can see, all of the panelists already think about those questions, and we have those discussions around resiliency of our system, but being able to have this discussion with the public at this moment right after the storm is a new meeting for us. And so I appreciate having the time and creating this space for this discussion. We residents in Pittsburgh that work in the climate space have noticed climate change already for several years. The winters are different, the rain event feel a little bit strong. I do think that the uniqueness of this storm that came last week really elevated the risk and the size of those events, like Professor Rippert presented earlier. This time of storm was unprecedented, and that's why the response time might have frustrated some of our residents. But we need to fully comprehend that this type of events are going to happen more and more often. And so we need to learn from the preparedness we had and the gap that we found and work together so that we can be prepared, because those events are going to be more and more recurring. I also want to thanks Duquesne Light for their staff and for the time and effort they spend in bringing power back to the community. I completely empathize with the residents that were 7 days without power. This is not acceptable in America this day and age. This was the very first time we had a storm of this magnitude. And we need people to fix this type of events. And we need trucks, and we need machinery, and we need time. And that's why, because this was the first time we had to deal with such a storm, we saw experience some delay. But with this team coming together here, I think we can really identify the next move we can take to resolve those issues.
All right, so I'm going to do two things. So one, I want to remind the folks who are listening, I see some questions have already popped up. Continue to put some questions in and we'll try to get to some of those. But I want to just turn it over to the panel before we get into any of my questions. Do you have any questions, or want to open up a conversation with other folks on this panel? You know, here's a good time to do that. Okay, so if we have none of that, so I'm trying to imagine this. Now, this was an unprecedented storm. What if it were just gradually more intense? What if it were, instead of 80, what if we had 95-mile-an-hour winds? What if the storm went for another 20 minutes? You know, we were stretched and, you know, we didn't break, but we said, this is, as you were saying, Chief, you know, you have a plan until it's battle, you know, but it's not battle tested, you know, then we have to adapt the plan. What would that have done to your responses and your systems if it were just that next step? You know, how much more before we would have broken?
I'm sure that the level of resources required would have been increased proportional to the storm damage. Now, as far as when we would have broken the plan, the good thing about the plan is what we would do is we have exercises. So we have a plan and we exercise the plan. And we always exercise the plan to the point of failure. Okay. So we know pretty much where we're getting ready to break. When stretching is getting ready to snap, then we know that it's time to start thinking about plan B. And there's always a plan B and a plan C. And sometimes that means not doing anything until just sitting there hunkering down until the storm passes before we can really get involved. So people would dial 911 because the tree came down. Well, I can't send a rig out in 60, 70 mile an hour wind. That's unsafe for my crews and just going to make the problem worse. So we might have to sit in, wait until things settle down. We have variables that's there and we have options, that we can use. So yeah, we test the plan to the point of failure, and my people in emergency management know that, okay, we're getting close. Let's start thinking about what plan B would be or plan C.
And so to you, Casey, related to that, as we're sort of debriefing, what we experienced, I heard about this, it sounded like it's a heroic effort with coordination between Duquesne Light and Pittsburgh Water to make sure that those pumps had power. We can go without power in the city and folks, it's not, but without water, that raises that level. And so that was really critical. It did work. What were we ready if it didn't? I mean, what was the plan B? Did we have a plan B or C? How close were we?
Yeah, so obviously the water system is very complex, and it's made up of a number of pressure districts, and different pumping stations are moving water to those pressure districts. So in terms of how close we are, that's the age-old question that's very complex. If we were to have sustained additional time without power, that does start to affect levels in reservoirs and tanks. And if you can't move water to them, it starts to have a gradual and then a more pronounced effect on different communities, depending on where we stand. In last week's event, we did have power outages at, I believe, 4 pump stations. And we were able to deploy different generators and sustain water levels by opening up pressure from different districts. But that was all hands on deck to try to determine what's the best approach here. And yeah, it definitely, if it extended much longer, we would have been facing much more complicated decision making that would have had to be done to ensure reliable water.
Right. I was at the facility last week with a group of high school students, and some of the equipment in that building has been there since before New Mexico and Arizona were states. We have an old system, and there've been a lot of investments in modernizing that system. But I think, it's just an important point that, we have to keep the water on and we have to work with what we have. But some of those old systems, old parts of that system are what makes it so resilient, because they invested in a good quality product back then. All right, so if there's nothing else, I'm going to turn over to some of the audience questions. You have something, Mike?
I did actually want to comment on that, just in terms of saying that we are Pittsburgh, and well, we can't really be broken. And I mean that in the sense that we've seen all around the world in times of severe crisis, when there are storms, when there are hurricanes, when there are earthquakes, that the citizens come together. They don't break apart. We're not going to see a devolution into looting and rioting or anything like that. Time and time again, we have seen that the opposite is true. And that if this storm had beaten us down even further, if it was 100-mile-an-hour winds, if it was 2 days long, at the end, we would have come out and we would have stayed working on this. And every resident of the city, we would have been standing together. And I just want to throw that out there so that everybody hears it.
Thank you for that. All right, so we've got a couple of questions. Some of them are related to what's going on with the administration, the federal government. We'll try to summarize those and put them into one in a second. But this first one, why is the city only doing this now when the climate has been changing rapidly? We've had microburst flooding. Obviously, this was an interesting weather event, but the writing was on the wall, and it's very disappointing that the city is only now considering climate change as something important for everyone in our community. A Pittsburgh for all means a Pittsburgh that is ready for a climate disaster, including underserved communities. And Mike, I know when's the best time to plant a tree, Mike?
20 years ago.
Okay, right. And
Next best time to plant one.
the next best time is right now.
Right now.
Right. And so, but a more direct answer. So the county is responsible for the Chief, you can help me make sure I don't make any mistakes in trying to explain this. But FEMA has a program and they require each county to have a hazard mitigation plan, and they're updated every 5 years. And in this cycle, the county is updating theirs this year. And what we've done extra this year, and prior to the event, sort of shortly after I came into this role, I talked to the mayor and I talked to the chief about let's expanding into a more robust presence that the city does in contributing to that plan. And, with the support of the mayor and the support of the chief, we've been thinking about what that looks like and how we take a bigger role in crafting our own comprehensive hazard mitigation plan. And so, right, the sentiment here, why are we only doing this now? It's not something that you can do right away, but there are cycles for funding these, and we're in that cycle now. Is there anything to add to that?
So, I would just like to add that you could call it whatever you want, but we've always had storms.
Mhm.
We've had fatal storms in the county where I remember back in the 80s, someone was killed in Kennywood. I remember the tornado that went across Mount Washington. I was just brand new here in the city in 2007, and we had a tornado that went through and tore up the science center, the cone on the science center and things. So so from my perspective, the cause isn't what's important to me, it's how we respond and prepare for it. And yes, climate change, in my opinion, is real. I know that is a political hot potato right now. You say climate change and people get upset. So typically I won't use the term climate change. I say we're having some freaky weather patterns.
Freaky weather.
Some unusual weather, and you can call it whatever you want, but that's what it is. So in response to that question, we're looking at climate change now, but your Office of Emergency Management, Homeland Security. And I agree with Director Hornstein. I tell him all the time, you guys need red lights and sirens, just like we have to go out, because you're part of the response and the recovery. And we have such a good working relationship. And Mr. Stewart is part of the incident management team that we have, and we've been trained together, and we communicate with PWSA all the time. And just to say, if there was a situation where we're running out of water, PWSA would definitely let the Office of Emergency Management know that. We will put the word out right off the bat. Everybody, fill up your bathtubs, fill up your sinks, and make sure you have that water in there. Now, I'm not saying you're going to drink that water, but the number one reason for having water going to every structure is sanitation. So you can flush your toilets and things like that with that water, okay? Because any building that does not have running water will be soon condemned. It's uninhabitable. So those are some of the things that we have in our plans for such an event like that.
Does anybody want to add anything to that?
Yes, I do want to, sorry, Chris.
No, go ahead.
I do want to add that the executive order is tasking the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security to work with planning for a first Pittsburgh hazard mitigation plan. The city has been working on climate sustainability and resilience for many years. In particular, we work with Pittsburgh Water and the Forestry Division on a tree planning map based on data to identify how which neighborhood do we need to invest in tree planting the most to really mitigate the heat risk in summer. And this data is going to be used in our Just Transition Comprehensive Plan. We're also working with PGA, Pittsburgh Water, on the green infrastructure, identifying a new site for continuing to deploy green infrastructure. So the mitigation involvement of the city is new, but the resiliency, the deployment is something we've been doing for a long time.
That's great. Yeah, so we're just echo, we've been working with Floor and her team in city planning for a number of years now to address these on a variety of fronts. You know, as the Department of Public Works, I always like to say, like, I feel like we have a very unique perspective because not only are we a first responder, but we're also a first preventer. And we're a first preventer of climate change by a lot of Michael's work and his team's work in forestry and the infrastructure that we work with Pittsburgh Water in terms of how we deal with some of our other climate hazards such as flooding, how we can partner together and prevent those things and make us more resilient when the storms do come. Because the fact of the matter is that they're going to come. The freaky weather is probably going to get a little bit freakier, and we might get our freak on a little bit more often. So, you know, I like to look at it through those two lenses. You know, how do I help us recover? How can I be there to support chief when the public needs us, when it does actually happen? And then, you know, taking those lessons and applying them to, you know, how do we prevent these things in the future? So a lot of what Michael talked about, like right tree, right place, like those are things that, again, we review and we continuously review as part of our work to help mitigate and prevent climate change.
And there's no clear line between response and recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so before we can get out in the street real good, the streets have to be clear. And the debris and stuff have to be moved off the streets, and then we can proceed safely to assist and answer those 911 calls. So it blends up now. Eventually, the response fades out and you go to full-blown recovery, which I believe is the phase that we're in right now. And we're probably coming close to the end of that because almost everyone has their power restored. And I don't think there's anyone left in the city that does not have power at this point. But if there is, you know, their crews are still working on it. So that's the main thing that, you know, we have to understand. I think a lot of times the public has an unrealistic expectation of us. They think, okay, I dialed 911, make it go away.
Right.
We can't make it go away. The only thing we can do, the best we can do is manage it.
All right. This next question, Ben, I think we're going to need you to weigh in on this one. Got a couple of questions about cuts in the federal administration, you know, Trump and his administration and cuts to some of these things. But this one specifically, with cuts to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service, what are our local options for tracking both sudden weather events and long-term trends to better inform our planning for harm prevention and resilience? Does Pennsylvania have such weather climate impact tracking resources that local governments can fall back on, or universities with atmospheric and meteorology departments?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I'll start with the first bit of good news. So aside from the database that tracks nationwide billion-dollar disasters, which it just got announced that is not going to update effective this year and onward. Everything else that was at risk of being shut down in terms of weather and climate information, tentatively, the contracts have been renewed for another year. So the short-term risk of that data going away has been averted for now. It's not exactly a long-term solution. I can't speak for the big picture because all of these atmospheric science and climate science entities are kind of, working on the fly at the moment. But here in our department, we actually house the Pennsylvania State climatologist, Kyle Imhoff, and he's got a team of others as well. And even before some of these cuts have actually been announced or proposed, he and his team have been working behind the scenes to beef up their computing power and database capability to try to do more with some of these data sets. So I guess to give you a straightforward answer, at least for right now, for the next year or so, or the next 13 months through June 2026, a lot of those data contracts have been renewed. So short term, the data is safe and will be there. At least here internally in the Pennsylvania State Climatologist Office, we are working fairly rapidly, or as rapidly as we can behind the scenes, to try to, at least for Pennsylvania data, try to tentatively fill in those gaps should they become gaps in 13 months.
All right, thank you. Anybody else want to tap in on that one, or are we good here? This is an interesting question. You mentioned the communications a few times and that how important that need is. Is there, where is Verizon, AT&T in the emergency response? Like what's their relationship, or whoever the communication providers are in the emergency response?
So we have working relationships with both T-Mobile, all three of them, Verizon, AT&T. AT&T right now services a system called FirstNet that all first responders have an opportunity to register with, and our numbers will move up to the have priority over other calls. The problem with the cell systems now is immediately, if a major hit happens, the cell systems will probably go down for a couple of reasons. One, maybe power outages to the cell sites. That seems kind of obvious. The second one is that everybody who's on social media is going to grab their phones and go live and suck up a lot of bandwidth and things like that. All three major cell carriers will provide us what they call cell on wheels, which we call a COW. They will provide us with charging stations that we can, so people who may have their power out can at least get to the corner intersection where one of these charging stations is set up to charge their lines. As far as emergency communications go, we still have systems in place for that, like the Amber Alert is a perfect example of that. If you're sitting at home watching TV and a child goes missing and they send out an Amber Alert, your phone alerts, your television alerts, your radio alerts, we have that same capability as well.
All right, thank you for that. That's one of those things that of course you have to have that. I never thought about that. I have a cousin who works in a dungeon under Wall Street in New York City. And it's like a hub for AT&T and Verizon, is to make sure that that's always there. And I never thought about, locally, what does that look like? But I appreciate that question and that response. Michael and Chris, this is what's going on with forestry now? How are we thinking about expanding that investment? How are we going to continue to trust trees when folks have just been, had trees smashing through their windows?
Well, I would say first and foremost, do not lose faith in trees. I know it's been a rough patch, but at the end of the day, the benefits to the community that you live in and to your own home dramatically outweigh the risks. And we have a very tight maintenance regime when it comes to responding to trees that have been reported to us as having a significant defect or that could pose a safety hazard. And those trees are prioritized for removal. They bump everything else down the list and we deal with them immediately. What I would say is that we are in the process of staffing up. We're taking on a couple of seasonal employees now that we hope to make a permanent thing. There have been ongoing discussions on how to have a more formalized progression for laborers to become tree care workers, as well as getting more certifications and more licensures and a higher level of technical proficiency within our department so that we have more certified risk assessors, people who have track qualifications. And building on top of all of that, we have we are in the process of receiving our new smart inventory from Davy. And this is an integrated AI-based 3D LiDAR scan of every single street tree across the entire city of Pittsburgh, all 55,000 of them. And it can go into the analytics of what percentage of the tree is dead, comparing every 2 years a scan so we can see if trees are progressively declining in health and prioritize them for removal without needing for those to be reported to us by the community, allowing us to get ahead in a proactive method that just simply didn't exist before. And this inventory does come with the inspection of 7,500 street trees over a certain diameter class to make sure that our biggest trees in the city are as healthy as they need to be to maintain stable roots in the ground. I'm sure the 7,500 has recently become closer to 7,400, but they are planning on starting next week. This was actually scheduled before the storm, and well, things have been busy.
Thanks, Mike. I would say, I like to start from the perspective of, let's all agree that, power lines and trees aren't necessarily like incompatible from a resiliency perspective, right? I've heard a lot of, community chatter. We need to bury all the power lines underground. I think, just from somebody that manages a large piece of it, large infrastructure footprint in the city, that's kind of impractical. So, both in a timeline as well as from a cost perspective. So I think we have to keep that in mind, but also let's remember that trees are like absolutely vital for our continued resiliency. They can't underscore that enough. There's tremendous benefits that trees provide us. This is the reduction of the urban heat island. This provides tremendous amounts of carbon sequestration, air cleaning, stormwater management, soil stabilization. So it protects us from a variety of hazards that Ben noted earlier. So again, we come back to our principles of, right tree, right location, and also working with our partners at Duquesne Light and elsewhere where it's, right utility, right configuration as well, right? There is an interplay, there's a relationship between the two things. We need to manage that relationship. I think our forestry division has done, an unbelievable job to date prior to this storm of just utility coordination in general. And we continue to, have that dialogue with utility companies, and we're welcome it in terms of how we can have a response. Beyond that, now we have to, get back to our recovery, to plant trees. We do need resources to help us with that. We have a lot of nonprofit partners that assist us with it, that do great work. Tree in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. It's just a handful of folks that I'm going to mention here, but with proper tree establishment, comes work. It comes effort, it comes observation, it becomes care. So there's, there is a maintenance aspect to that that's actually critical in how we can respond, because again, trees provide all of those benefits to us. So we need to manage that. We don't like to, as I like to say, Chief would agree with me on this. We don't want to trade one harm for another, right? So we want to make sure that we absolutely restore a lost canopy that we had in a way that is sustainable and manageable into the future. So we're constantly working with our partners on doing that. That takes a lot of, habitat coordination, if you will, habitat restoration. With that, getting into the ground truth, as Michael said, it's staffing up where we need help. So creating that pathway for employees so there can be a natural progression. If you can come in an entry-level job on Public Works and this is a career that excites you, and there are a lot of exciting opportunities for growth with this. You get a lot of training, as Michael outlined. There's great camaraderie. I think the esprit de corps in the forestry division as particular, but just in Public Works broadly, it's a great place to work. It is a great career that I think people should really strongly consider. We take employee safety extremely seriously. This was, a hazardous event, not just in the storm itself with 80-mile-an-hour wind, what we were approaching, and the public was approaching, out in the right of way with down power lines. So, there's also opportunities for collaboration with fire. which we had in this storm, which were greatly appreciated. Fire came out and assisted us in identifying like places where we could safely work, where we couldn't. And I'm kind of very proud to note that, within our immediate storm response, we didn't have a single injury to a single employee. And those are all things that build our resiliency. And it starts with that, keeping that individual, whether they are working or a member of the public, doing everything that we can to keep them safe.
Right. All right, we've got time for a couple. Thank you for that. As she was handing me these notes, what I was ready to stick a pen in is I've also heard something about opportunity for folks who are looking for work and want to do this kind of work, that this is a good place to get started. And that sort of caught my attention because I know a lot of people who might, be in position to take advantage of that opportunity. But now I have a couple of more questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of these, so we're probably going to do two more, and then we're going to begin our wrap up. But I haven't had a chance to sort of go through these. But someone asked that, so much of the disaster response funds are only available after the fact. And what we've been talking about is recognizing that. Clearly, we need to get out ahead of climate change. How much of a commitment can be made to what public education needs to happen to say, look, we're saving money in the short run and long run by being fully prepared. And so that's what we're trying to tee up here today. You want to talk about a mitigation plan or strategy and why that investments make sense? Maybe you should start from the water perspective.
Yeah.
Why do you invest in redundancy and resiliency?
Yeah, so we've made a significant effort to evaluate our system, both the risks to our system from natural disasters. We also face a number of other threats, like I mentioned before, with interdependencies, and not to mention just your standard physical cyber attacks that we face. So we look at really all the risks to our system specifically, and then we start to prioritize based on that risk to mitigate hazards where we can. So this has been an ongoing effort, especially highlighted over the past 5 to 10 years, that we have wanted to identify what those risks are and either build those into a capital improvement plan to try to create redundancies within our system. Also looking for different grant and funding opportunities that are available to us to continue to make those investments in our system to enhance resiliency. But there's a great effort that goes into just simple collaboration with other utilities and with the city to ensure that if we are faced with any kind of situation such as what happened this a few weeks back, that we are able to respond effectively. That's all part of resiliency in itself too. So there's a number of administrative items that need to be done, training, exercising, as Chief said, as well as just your general collaboration as a community to ensure that resiliency.
So same question to you, Director or Chief. Make the case for how we can tell the public, look, these investments that we're making now in mitigation are wise investments.
So the technical definition for mitigation is to lessen the impact of an event. We can't, prevent it completely. Want to lessen that impact. And typically, as we've witnessed in this storm, we are always reactive, but mitigation requires some proactive response from us. And that's why I reached out to you earlier this year, Dr. Bey, to say, hey, as far as future plans go for the city of Pittsburgh, let us plan or build into those plans, build into the development some efforts that will protect the development from what the highest risk that we face. So we know that flooding is probably the #1 natural disaster across the country. There isn't a part of the country that isn't affected by that or face that risk. The other one, as the professor said, high winds, okay, which comes from microbursts and tornadoes. So maybe we should build our structures, make them a little more wind resistant. I agree with Director Hornstein. There's no way we're going to bury all of our utilities. That's not going to happen. However, we can make sure that there's some gap between our power lines and our trees. And those people who have very, very tall trees in their yards, be wary that they can crush a house. So you might want to, those are things that can be done for mitigation. And I say it all the time, the one ingredient you need to have a disaster is people. If there are no people, no homes, no loss of life, no businesses, no jobs being lost, then all you have is just some wet, soggy ground. So we can make sure we don't put people in a position where they will be exposed to these risks. That would also be a good mitigation effort. And speaking of the high winds, we are coming into the time when Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania sustains the most weather activity. The second week of May through the second week of June is when it's almost like game on for Mother Nature. She can throw anything at us during that 4-week span.
All right, so we're not going to have time to get to all of these. I appreciate that so many of you, at least in this second batch of questions that you did leave your names here. We are going to include all of this in our summary report, but I want to make sure we have enough time to wrap up. I have one of these questions I want to get to because I think it's an interesting one. Somebody wants to know who's responsible, right? And, the question is a little more direct than that. Like in Pittsburgh, we have city maintained roads, we have county maintained roads, and we have state highways. If a tree falls across that, who's responsible for clearing access? How does that coordination work when faced with a disaster or an incident of this level?
I could probably handle that one too. Emergency management's job is to coordinate. We don't go out and tell the linemen how to do their job. We don't grab chainsaws and tell forestry how to do their job. What we do is we make sure that everyone is operating on the same page at the same time. We're all in the same sandbox together. No duplication of effort, no one stepping on each other's toes. As a matter of fact, our motto is Pastoris Filium, which is in Latin means herder of cats. Okay, so that's what we do. And so as far as responsibility for coordination, that would be emergency management because everybody else knows their job. They're subject matter experts at what they do.
So that's different than snow removal, where the county's going to clear their roads, the city's going to clear it.
So we were talking about that just the other day in the class, and I was like, okay, so if there's another snowmageddon like what we had in 2010, what's the priority for the roads? And we know that the snow emergency routes go first and secondary. I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think anybody who's stuck cares what's on the side of that truck, that plow truck that's coming down the road. That's why the coordination and collaboration comes in. Now, we don't want Chris's team doing the same road that the county's doing at the same time because that's duplication of effort and waste of resources. That's why we are here to collaborate and coordinate and make sure, and most importantly, communicate what we're trying to do.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to, before I ask Ben to summarize, so Ben's background is in hazard mitigation and communication and atmospheric science. And so what I'm asking him to do big picture is to help us kick off, what should we be thinking about as we prep a hazard mitigation, climate informed, all hazard mitigation plan. But before we turn it over to him and hear his summary notes, anybody else, anything we left on the table that you want to make sure we communicate?
Yeah, I do. One thing, I just want to make sure that we touch upon like how important the community support network that folks have is functioning. Like I was a first responder in this event, but also, I'm a father of 3. So, part of And I lost power just like everybody else. So I had all of those burdens, right? Now I'm fortunate. I have a very strong, community and family support network that I could lean on in this time. But that we provide those opportunities for folks that don't have that, or perhaps there are opportunities for additional support. And I think, Chief, you've brought up some really great, interesting ideas in our discussions about how we bring those resources to folks that need them, how we get in touch, how we communicate, how we access them, how they access us. So part of, we made very intentional decisions during this storm event about, opening up our debris yards for the public so they could help, have a sense of return to normalcy, giving instruction on, how to dispose of food and why we could accept it at the curb. Because I received some requests, for things like, can we put a dumpster up in a neighborhood so folks can dump in? It's actually, no, we can't do that. That actually creates an environmental hazard. It's well documented for us to do that. It will lead to a lot of illegal dumping. So we do take those community support infrastructure, because we're part of that community support network, right? Public Works. And so, we do take those things very seriously. We had a lot of robust discussion about how we were delivering those things for people to return their lives to normal as soon as possible.
Anyone else?
I have one thing, and it is do not touch downed lines. It is the single biggest thing in an emergency to be aware of. We've got turnaround, don't drown. We don't have a snappy thing for don't touch electrical lines, don't touch phone lines, don't touch anything that's a wire hooked to a pole, because you never know if at some point on that span of wire or an adjacent span of wire, it's become shorted out, or if it's crossed into something that's actually still powered on. You just can't know what the hazards are. So please stay away from it.
Let's take that a step further. Don't touch it with anything.
If there's a line on the ground,
Yeah, because the last victim used a stick to try to move the line and was electrocuted. So don't touch it with anything. There are professionals out there who know how to handle it. Be patient. They'll get to it.
Or Casey, anything?
I think those points were essential, so it's hard to follow up. I will just point out to the public that there is already a public survey for the county hazard mitigation plan. So I invite you to go on their website and share your feedback. And as well as our Just Transition Comprehensive Plan, we also have a survey out, and we would like to know what you care about and what you want to see for Pittsburgh future. So please participate.
Okay, do you have anything?
No, I would just say that we are making a concerted effort to actually work with the city on hazard mitigation, applying our most vulnerable assets to ensure that we continue to make the right investments that are right for our community and our ratepayers, to ensure that we continue to have sustainable infrastructure.
All right. Thank you. Ben, do you have any remarks just to sort of summarize? I really appreciate your participation here. Any summarizing remarks for us?
Yeah, sure. So some common themes between what just about all of us spoke to. I'm going to first revisit what Chief Jones said, and that is, no mitigation plan is going to be this magical stack of paper that suddenly prevents every bad thing from happening. What the goal is to reduce the impact and the severity and the scope of these future events. And things like that, effective ones, begin with this roundtable plus person on Zoom type of discussion, such as the one we're having. And so we've also, several of us have brought it up too, developing these plans to keep everyone safe. It is a community effort. And so we all bring ideas to the table. all 57 of you online listening to this right now bring things to the table. Everyone else in a city or a county has things they can bring to the table. So it truly is a group effort. And that's really the only way we can ensure that we are serving the underrepresented communities or the communities that are missing something. Couple other things, a lot of the talking points, whether it's upgrading infrastructure, thinking of new ways to do things, hiring more people to beef up that response capability. A lot of these things require money, a monetary investment. But I did want to briefly mention too, and I saw a couple of questions come in related to this. At the individual level, if changing your monetary thing is currently not possible, a lot of times it might be easy to think, well, there's nothing I can do. And there actually isn't the next best thing that you can do. And that is increase something that's called social capital. And that's essentially looking at personal connections or a community around you, because if disaster strikes and you lose power, or you lose water, or you lose some of those essentials that you need, if you don't have the monetary means to, say, evacuate or go somewhere else, the next best thing to build up around residents and to build up in a community is this social capital. It's connections, it's resources, people you can call or go to, or some community group, whether it's through churches or just other community groups that can essentially rally around each other. And if it's not something that everyone at the individual level might be comfortable or have awareness of, but those are other sorts of things that collectively, city planning groups, all of these entities have the ability to help with. And so know that if there's this monetary investment when it comes to hazard mitigation, but there's also this social component, this idea of social capital, deepening a pool of personal connections that, should disaster strike again, and it will, we don't know where it will or how bad it will be. Again, we're trying to lessen the impact of future disasters, but when the next bad thing happens, if you can't in the near term, like deepen a financial pool of resources as much as you'd like to, the next best thing to do is deepen that social pool of connections, so that if you can't, from a monetary standpoint, do anything new about it, from a social standpoint, you might be able to have a house to go to, or have someone deliver meals to you, or things like that. Let me see. For right now, I mean, those were some big talking points that I had written down to bring back at the end here. Dr. Bay, I don't know if there's anything else specifically you wanted me to touch on.
No, that was good. Thank you for that. And I want to thank, you and the rest of the panelists, Chief Jones, Director Hornstein, Mike, Director Stewart, Assistant Director Marion, and the mayor for making this space for us, and for the folks who helped us pull this off, who are sitting in the room on the production part of it. This is an early step in what we're embarking on. This is not our first step. This is not the first time that we've been having these conversations, but this is an important time for us to really think about this. While it's fresh on people's minds, we're going in deep into this summer of engagement through the comprehensive plan that we're doing. We're including the hazard mitigation planning in that effort. And we're thinking about it, as the chief has said, and as the mayor said, and others, it's that household resiliency level that we're focusing on. Yet that's the scaffolding for the rest of this work. And so when we're engaging in the next couple of weeks and months and asking folks to think about what is their household plan, what is your personal plan, what is your block plan, what's your neighborhood plan, so that community organizations and other folks who are participating on this webinar, we need your involvement, we need your support, and we need you to promote what we're talking about here. The county has a survey online now. You go to the Allegheny County, if you just search for that in your browser, Allegheny County All Hazards Mitigation Plan, you can weigh in on that. We're going to get some of that and include that into what we're building here to think about what's Pittsburgh's role in that plan. So thank you again, and I appreciate this. And, stay tuned. We're going to continue this conversation. Thank you all.